These are the moors on a good day. Large parts of northern England and much of Scotland is covered with this sort of landscape. If we look out, we can see the vehicle tracks, which are great if you've got a 4x4. No good for a car. We can see where the heather's been burnt to provide new shoots for the livestock. When it's like this, warm and still, it's great. When it's wet and cold, it can be grim. It's a great place for walkers, but you've got to take care. As a bug out location, they're pretty poor. There are very few resources. You'd have to man pack everything in with you. Food, shelter, fuel. There's not much up here to be scavenged. Much of the moorland is seemingly featureless terrain. It's rough, so therefore you need to really have map reading skills, and that begins by finding your position on the map. You need a compass because in this terrain there are very few landmarks. You need to be able to establish a bearing and walk on it. The land is high, it's exposed and it's wet. It provides a natural soak for the rain and gradually releases it into the river system. So therefore, any depression can be counted as a dangerous wet area, such as this one here. Not only have you got the spiky grass, but you've also got sphagnum moss. What we've got here is sphagnum moss. Now sphagnum moss typically only grows in wet areas because it soaks up so much water. It's a natural sponge. Apparently the Romans used it. They would dry it out, they would put a cut fig in the middle and let it go mouldy. When they were wounded, they would put the fig on, which then had some mould which they called penicillium, put that on the wound and then put the sphagnum moss on to soak up the blood. During World War II, it was collected, sterilised and used for wound dressings as well. Although it looks a lot more inviting than the heather moorland, it isn't in many ways. The heather is dry, the ground underneath is wet. Alright, you have to use a ground sheet or something below you, but here you're straight onto the wet ground. So it's easy to get a tent peg in, but more water soaks up towards you. Even here, where it's well drained, it's still damp. So, on the moors, be aware that you don't go to these bright green areas that are covered with the sphagnum moss. It's just not worth it. You've got to get away from these areas. As sphagnum dries out, it becomes a darker green. The really wet stuff is a real bright green. So if you get this stuff and squeeze it, you get a fair amount of water very, very quickly. You collect it, you filter it, and then you boil it or stir-tab it. It shouldn't have any chemicals in, but there are plenty of wild animals up here that leave their feces. In the summer, this stuff will dry out, especially on the raised pieces of ground, so you have to go down to the lower pieces to collect the wet sphagnum. Sphagnum is often the basis for peat. Peat's been a fuel for centuries, so it's really, really dangerous to use open fires on moorland. Chemical heaters are the real answer if you want to stay safe on the moors. Otherwise, you've got to use either cold rations or be extremely careful. Open fires are just totally out. There are tracks across the moors, but be careful when you try to follow them. Many of them are just sheep tracks that won't take you in the direction you want to go. Sometimes you're lucky and come across vehicle tracks. You can usually assume that they take a fairly straight route and may even be marked on a map. But what you really need is a compass. We're on a slight rise here, which makes it a better campsite because of the drainage. In front of us we can see a typical moorland landscape. We've got slight undulations. Down in the valleys it gets wetter and wetter. So if you see bright green, that's sphagnum moss, stay away, it's wet. It's not so apparent today, but you can see the difference in coloration. I'm going to return back to the car now. First thing I'm going to do is check my line of march on the compass. Find a landmark, walk towards it. Once you're there or the landmark disappears, check your compass again and find another landmark. It's that easy, really. This is one of my old stomping grounds. I used to come here fairly frequently, but over the years the land has changed. The area has been designated as an SSI, so instead of having large areas of very short grass, nature's now returning to what it was. If you're going to use an area, you need to get out and recce it first.